Joseph is our next friend of God. And so Joseph starts off in the book of Genesis. Chapter 37 starts Joseph's story all the way to chapter 50. So the rest of Genesis will be about Joseph and his life and what he does. So really great story, and there's some really good little tidbits in here. This is a fantastic story. I mean, the drama, the tears, the emotions that happen, and the relatable. This is great story. It should be, it puts to shame anything else. It really, really does. So, the beginning of Joseph's story is, we know that we talked about Joseph was the first son of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. So he is that firstborn of the favorite wife. And because he was the favorite wife's first son after she had been barren and had not had any children, because of that, Jacob, we can assume, we don't know this for a fact, well, we might, but Jacob was like, oh, he loved that little boy. He loved Joseph. And it was evident to all the other brothers that Joseph was the number one son as far as Jacob was concerned. That did not sit well with his brothers, as it does, because not only was he the favorite, then his daddy gave him this coat of many colors, and we've all heard about Joseph and his coat of many colors. And everyone wore a robe. It wasn't the robe that was the idea of him having a robe that was spectacular. It was the actual robe, because it was more like a robe for royalty. It was probably long, had long sleeves, but typically they were shorter sleeves, and it went past the knee. Typically the robes went to the knee. His went all the way down, and it had all these rich, vibrant colors that it was made out of. So it really made him stand out and look special. So that in of itself is like, oh my gosh. So Joseph had some dreams, and he gets up and he tells, oh my gosh, I had this dream that all of you fell down and worshiped me. Is that crazy? Gosh. Not funny to his brothers. And he had another dream where he was that the sun and the moon and all the other things, because I don't know if they knew did they know that there were planets? I don't know how they would, but he just felt like the heavenly realms all were revolving around him. And so his brothers didn't like that either. And in fact, his dad was like, seriously, son, I know you're my favorite and all, but your mother and I are not going to bow down to you. We're not going to worship you. We're not going to revolve around you because we're still in charge here. So the dreams didn't go over well. So at some point, they were shepherds and they were nomads. So the brothers had taken, his older brothers had taken the flocks and were, what's that word? Shepherding was not the word I was looking for. But that's funny. So they were shepherding far away. Grazing. They had taken them grazing. And so they had gone further away. And so Jacob sends Joseph and says, you go and check on them. I need you to know where they are and see what's going on over there. So Joseph goes. And so his brothers see him coming. I mean, how could they miss him in his coat? So they're like, here comes Joseph. Good grief, a little, So he gets there. So as he's coming, they're like, we need to get rid of this kid. He's getting on our nerves. This is the perfect opportunity we have to get rid of him. I mean, he could be eaten by a bear or, murdered on the road or kidnapped, and Dad will never know that it was us. So the oldest brother, Reuben, we got to give Reuben some credit, because Reuben says, no, we can't do that. We can't kill him. We cannot kill our brother. Let's just don't kill him. Let him, let's just dig a pit and put him in it. Or it's actually a cistern that held water and it was empty. And so Reuben said, let's just put him down in there and then we'll let that be it. And there we'll go. But Reuben had plans to come back after his brothers left and get him out and save him. We don't know if that was actually going to happen, because what happens is this group comes, as Joseph gets there, this group comes by and they're like, hey, you want to buy our brother? And they're like, okay, fine, that seems good. So they sell him into slavery. They go back, and now Reuben is like, oh, shoot, they've done it. They've gotten rid of him. So they go back, and Jacob, of course, thinks that Joseph is dead. They all pretty much think that he is dead. And so this is what happened. That was in chapter 37. So 38 we can skip because it's not about Joseph. It's about his big brother Judah. And he's not in our story. He's not one of our friends of God that we're going to talk about. I mean, he obviously becomes a friend of God because, well, I mean, I don't know. We don't know enough about Judah. We only see a little bit about it. But he does become the beginning of the line of Jesus. Not the beginning, but this is where Jesus comes from, is from Judah. So we know that Judah does have some redeeming qualities. But 38 is about Judah and his deal. So, chapter 39, Joseph ends up, because all these J's get me confused sometimes, so I might say Joe at some point. Just know that I'm referring to Joseph. So, Joseph ends up being sold to a man named Potiphar. He's No, he's not. He's Egyptian. Potiphar is an Egyptian official, and he's very wealthy. He is very close to the Pharaoh, and so he ends up in Potiphar's house. And Potiphar's like, this kid's great. He does a fantastic job, and I'm going to just make him in charge of everything. So he will be the end-all, be-all of this house, and then I can just live my life and not worry about if things are running correctly. So he gets to in this position, so he just pretty much gets to do everything he wants, even though he is still a slave technically. So he gets in there, and apparently it says that he is very handsome. Let's see. Where is it? Oh, I can't find the exact verse, but he's very handsome, and so Potiphar's wife comes to him and says, "Oh, come to bed with me, fella. You're cute." And Joseph turns her down. And this happens over and over again. And he is repeatedly saying, "No, I'm not doing that." Oh, he just leaves and ignores her. And finally, she comes to him and says, "You come to bed with me now." And she says this with like exclamation points, like she is serious about it. And Joseph says, "No. How could I," he says in verse 9, this is where it is. In verse 9, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" That was Joseph's response. Not necessarily that he had this loyalty to Potiphar, although he says, I have all this stuff. I can do whatever I want. I'm in charge here. He has trusted me with this. And he has not himself offered you to me, so I'm not going to do that. But he also says, I will not sin against God. That is wicked, and I will not do that. Well, once he puts her in his place, she's like, how dare you? And she goes and tells her husband, "This kid that you've brought in makes me really uncomfortable, and he has been making just really questionable comments to me. He's going to make a fool of me. Look, here's his robe." And Potiphar gets really mad, and he throws him into prison, into the king's prison. So he ends up being in prison. But in verse 39, chapter 21, it says, "But the Lord was with him." The Lord was with him. And something else, too, that we learn, Joseph becomes head of the house, and it says in verse 5 that the Lord blessed the Egyptian household because of Joseph. And I think that this is part of the thing that we need to look out about Joseph's character, about being a friend of God. The way that Joseph lived his life brought blessing to the household that he was in. These were Egyptians. Not only did they not believe in, acknowledge, worship God, they had their own gods. They had lots. But just because Joseph was there, and because they liked Joseph and respected him, and God was with him, the household prospered. Everyone was blessed because of that. So you have to look at, do people that I'm associated with get a blessing because of me? I don't know. Could somebody tell me that? If I bring blessing, no, y'all can't say that. You're sitting right here. Just think about that. Is that the kind of life that I live? So that's the first thing that we can notice about Joseph. That's the kind of life he lived, that just because he lived there, he was bringing blessing and prosperity to the house of Potiphar. So Joe's now in prison, but he's Joseph, and here again, he is receiving blessing. And the warden of his part really likes him and says, hey, kid, you're doing okay. I'm going to let you be in charge of all these other prisoners. You're doing great. So you are now in charge of this part of the prison. So he had some freedoms, as much as you can have while being locked up. So he had these things. Well, the king, Pharaoh, had a cupbearer and a baker that made him mad. So he put them in, we don't know why, and we don't know how long he intended for them to stay there, but he put them down in there. And Joseph notices them, that they're dejected and sad, and he's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Well, we've been put down in here, and now I've had this weird dream. He asked the cupbearer, what's your dream? And so the cupbearer tells him his dream, and the cupbearer, Joseph, says, well, he said, the cupbearer says, I don't have any magicians to ask, or any of these people to ask what this means. I don't know what to do. And Joseph says, well, God tells you those things, so let me see. God might tell me what your dream means. And he interprets this dream. He does the same thing for the baker. He says, oh, well, let me tell you my dream. I've had a dream too. Can you interpret mine? And he does. Lo and behold, these dreams come true. The cupbearer ends up living. The baker, not so much. He was hanged, but it's exactly what the interpretation of the dream was. So when Joseph had said to the cupbearer, hey, when you get out of here, remember me. Remember what I've done for you. Remember this, okay? Don't forget about me down here in the prison. The cupbearer forgets about Joseph. 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. And he cannot understand what it means. None of his people can understand what it means. They can't give him an answer. They're like, we don't know what that means. That's weird. That's really weird, okay? Because it's 7 very large, healthy cattle come up. And then 7 very scrawny, ribs showing cattle come up and eat the healthy ones. And then he has another dream where there are 7 stalks of beautiful grain that come. And they come forward. And then 7 sticks, like stalks of grain, come and they overtake. And no one can figure out what this dream was. And as he's talking about this, and the cupbearer goes, oh, you know what? There's a guy down in the prison that can interpret your dreams. Yeah, he did. He told me exactly what was going to happen. Remember, you threw us in prison, and then you hanged the baker. I said cake. Cake maker, baker. What else would he be? He is going. You hanged him, right? But you let me live. But Joseph, this guy down there, he's a Hebrew kid. He told us he was right. So Pharaoh says, "Bring him to me." So Joseph comes up, and he tells Pharaoh what the dreams mean. And he says, look, you're going to have 7 years of incredible abundance. You are going to be so prosperous in these 7 years. But the next 7 is going to be bad. It's going to be real bad. It's going to be famine so bad that you don't even remember the 7 years of abundance. And Pharaoh's like, oh my gosh. And Joseph says, well, you know what I would do if I were you? I would find some guy and hire him and say, so he could be in charge of this and get ready for this time of famine that's coming. And, as people come, he would take 1/5 of all the crops and everything and store it away so that when the 7 bad years come, we're going to be ready. And Pharaoh's like, that sounds like a great idea. How about you do it? And Joseph says, okay, I'll do that. Pharaoh, here he is again, the same story that we've already seen twice already with Joseph. He's now out of the prison and in the house of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is giving him the keys to the kingdom. And he goes, well, I'm going to give you, he gave him a more Egyptian name. He gave him, and he found a wife for him and gave him this wife. And the wife was the daughter of the priest of whatever god it was. So he's now got an Egyptian wife and an Egyptian name. And that is going to give him, probably in Pharaoh's mind, this is going to give him some credibility. So, and he gave him his ring. And he was like, so people are going to see him. They're going to see my ring and my mark. And he's got this Egyptian name. And now he's got this Egyptian wife. And this is going to go well. So that's what happened. And all this time, what do we see? He was staying true to who he was, and God was with him. And something else that struck me this morning as I was trying to tame my hair and thinking about what a mess I look like. God is with Joseph in the pit, through slavery, being sold off, can you imagine what he felt like being sold off by his brothers, by his own family, his brothers that, they hate me. That feeling and the dejection and the hurt that he felt, God was with him. When he was in prison, God was with him. When Pharaoh calls him up from the prison, he first has to go bathe and clean himself and shave, because the Pharaohs and Egyptians didn't like a lot of hair. So he had to shave and get clean before he could go into the presence of Pharaoh. But God had been with Joseph, hairy and dirty and in a prison cell. Look at that difference of what God requires and wants, and what Pharaoh, the earthly, fleshly things, want from us. How we have to be concerned with that. So messy hair and all, God doesn't care. I'm here and I'm trying to tell y'all what the word says. God does not care that my hair is like this. I wish he did, because he could fix it. But that's neither here nor there. So he ends up, and this is where the best part of the story comes. So here we are. That was chapter 41. See, I'm moving so quickly. Not really, but sort of. You could read this faster. But sometimes it's helpful for somebody to tell you what it says. So chapter 42, here comes the famine. It's bad. It's not just Egypt that has the famine. It's everywhere. The world is in a famine. And so everyone starts to hear, hey, the Egyptians have food. So everyone starts coming in there. And who do they deal with when they get there? Joseph. They're going to see Joe the grain guy. So Jacob hears, guys, he tells his sons, he says, hey guys, the Egyptians have food. Go get some. Take some silver, go get some. Okay? Not you, Benjamin. You stay right here with me. I don't want anything to happen to you. Remember, Benjamin is the youngest brother of Joseph. He is the second son of Rachel, the favorite wife. And it says that he was a son born to Jacob in his old age. And Rachel, remember, has died during childbirth. So Rachel's gone. All he's got left of Rachel now is Benjamin. And he says, Benjamin, you're not going. You're going to stay right here with Daddy, okay? So Benjamin doesn't go, but the other brothers leave. And they go, and as soon as they step foot in front of Joseph, Joseph recognizes them immediately. He knows exactly who they are. And he's a little hesitant. And now, mind you, this was fascinating to me. He is speaking Egyptian because he's using an interpreter. It says that in the text, that he's using an interpreter, so it's not like he's speaking Hebrew to his brothers. So they have no idea who he is. He's clean shaven, remember? He's clean like the Egyptians. And he has this Egyptian name, and he is in this place of power, and the brothers do not recognize him at all. And he is saying to them, you are spies. You have come in here to try and see what our weaknesses are. And they're like, no, we promise. We just want to eat. We have a brother at home. We have our father. There were 12 of us, and our one of our brothers is no more, and then the other brother is at home with our father. And Joseph says, all right, well, I'll give you some grain, but I need to see this other brother. And they're like, no, no, we can't bring him to you. Listen, our father really loves him, and we can't take him and bring him. And they said, Joseph's like, well, then I'm not giving you any grain. And they're like, no, there has to be something you can do. What they come up with is Simeon decides to, Joseph takes Simeon, the second brother, his second oldest brother, puts him in prison and says, I'm keeping him till you guys come back. Here's your grain and go. They get home, they're unpacking their grain. Lo and behold, that the silver is in there. They didn't take payment. And Jacob is like, what have you done? I sent you over there. You didn't bring back Simeon. And now you are telling me that this guy wants to see Benjamin? Heck no. And y'all didn't pay for it. You stole this. No, we can't go back. No, forget it. That's it. We're not going back. But it is what it is. So long, Simeon. Too bad. They run out of grain. I don't know how much time passes. They run out of grain. And they're like, Dad, if you had let us go back, this wouldn't have happened. We just got to go back and show him Benjamin. He was really interested in Benjamin. I don't know why, but he was super interested, and it'll be better if we just go. And Jacob's like, no, what have I got left? No. And don't you know that Jacob at this point was like, what have I done to deserve this? This is awful. We're starving. We're in a famine in this land that we're supposed to have one day, and it's awful, and I don't like it. My favorite son is gone, probably ripped to shreds and eaten by some wild animal. Now this guy wants to take this other son, and I know what has happened to me. And Jacob says, everything is against me. Everything's against me. They convince him to let them take Jacob. They say, listen, it's on. Judah steps forward and says, look, this is on me. This is our pay. This is on me. I promise on my own life that I will bring Benjamin back to you. They head off again. When they come back and Joseph sees Benjamin, he is overcome. And he tells his staff, he's like, go prepare a meal at my house. Bring these guys there. I want to eat with them. Get their brother out of prison and bring them over there. And again, his brothers are like, what in the heck is happening? This guy is so weird. Why is he so infatuated with us? This is so strange. Does he do this with everyone? This is weird. So they get to the house. They have this meal. He's like, well, is your father still alive? And they're like, yeah, he's still alive. And he said, I want to meet him. I want to see your father. I want to see your dad. And they're like, no. And he was like, yes, go get him, bring him back. And this young one that came this time, he's going to stay with me. You can have this other one back, but he's going to stay. And they were like, no, we can't do this. And he was like, yes, you will. And they were like, no, we're going to come right back. We promise we'll come right back. So he sends them on their way, but in Benjamin's bag of grain, he puts his cup in it. So as they get out the door a little bit, one of his servants runs down and says, hey, somebody took our master's cup. It's gone. And they're like, well, we don't have it. We didn't take it. They're like, well, we're searching your bags, and when we find it, that person is coming back with us. Guess so. Well, whose bag was it in? Benjamin's. Benjamin's like, I didn't do it. I did not take your cup. I don't know how that got there. And they're like, oh, Benjamin, what has happened here? So instead of just sending Benjamin back, they all turn back and go. And Judah makes an impassioned plea with Joseph. And he says, you cannot take this brother. Our father will literally die. he will absolutely die if you take this brother. If we show up back without him, he will die. He will absolutely die. And Joseph is overcome. And Joseph dismisses his staff and reveals himself to his brothers. And it's a very emotional meeting, and they are crying and carrying on, so much so that the staff, who's now listening at the door like this, so y'all can't hear me if I go over here by the wall, but if they're listening at the door like this, and they're said, what? He's crying. Joseph is crying. Oh my gosh. What is happening? Those are his brothers. So he's telling them this. More. Okay, it'll start back in a minute. I'm going to have to tell my landlord. It's my daddy. Mama, call daddy. Tell them to stop. So, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, so the staff is like, oh, that's his brothers in there. His brothers have come. That's his family. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And they go tell Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is so excited that Joseph's family has come. So exciting. Let me skip ahead in my notes. See all these, I have written pages and pages and pages and pages of this. So here we go. So Pharaoh goes and comes and says, hey, I'm so excited that y'all are his brothers and that you're here. And he says, I want you to go get your dad and bring him back. And he says, I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. So Pharaoh loves Joseph so much, appreciates him, respects him, all of that. He respects him so much, and he has prospered, and Joseph has saved him from all of the famine and all of those things, that he gives his family, says, yes, bring your family, bring them in, and they can have the choice. Yeah, the best. We want them here. We want them to be here. Go get him. So they go back and they get Jacob and their wives and their children. And so they are all going to come back into Egypt. They leave, this is important, they leave 66, a number of 66 leaves. When they get to Egypt, it'll be 70 in the family of Jacob. Remember, whose name has been changed, of Israel. There will be 70 members of Israel when they go into Egypt. After Jacob dies, he says, I want to be buried back with the land of my fathers. Please do not bury me in Egypt. Jacob goes, and when he dies, they bury him. They bury him there. Okay? In Genesis, so when they get back from burying his father, and Pharaoh goes with them. There is a whole Egyptian contingency that goes to the burial in chariots and donkeys and whatever, so much so that the people that see it go, oh, the Egyptians are doing some kind of ceremony out here. Wow, what is going on? They notice this group of these Egyptians. That's how big of a deal it was. They are there for the burial. When they come back, the brothers are worried. They're like, okay, what if Joseph was just being kind to us and not killing us because dad was still alive and he didn't want to upset dad? What if that's what's happened here? And Joseph says, no, that's not the deal. That's not how I feel. And in chapter 50, this is the second important part. Or how many important parts have I given you? This is the thing for me. In chapter 50, verse 19 through 21, Joseph says, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. What you meant for evil, God has meant for good. All of these things that are happening, Joseph is looking back going, I can see that was awful and it was terrible, but I know it was bad and I had to live through some things, but now I can look and say, God meant it for good, because even though I had to be sold into slavery, someone had to be here. Someone had to be here so that when this famine came, I could save the lives of my family. So the line of Israel is not wiped out or decimated. I had to be in this spot. I had to be here. And even when Joseph dies, even all this, he gets to see his great-grandchildren. And he comes in and he says to them, hey, he says, God, in his dying, he says he promises the son of Israel that God will surely come to your aid. When you leave, when you do, God's going to come to your aid. He is still going to be with you. Even though I'm dying, God is still going to be with you. Remember that. And then Joseph dies. And then we know what happens to Israel. We know what happens in Egypt. The pharaohs that knew Joseph and the Israelites died, and so now they end up being, I got to quit talking, but this is so exciting to me. They end up being this thorn in the side of the Egyptians. And when they finally leave, they went in as 70. There were 70 members of Israel's family. When they leave in the Exodus, it's 600,000 men. That does not include the women and the children. So over this time, it's like 430 years, I think. Over this time, they go from 70 to about 1 million people. That's a lot. And they prospered and did well. And they remembered God in that time. But they were saying, again, why is this so hard? But Joseph says, that still rings true there. What you have meant for evil, God has meant for good. So the point is, to me, that says, stay faithful. Stay trusting, because we have to. We have to be that way. In order to live in this world, we have to be mindful that God is sovereign. God is sovereign. And we don't always, Joseph got to see why his hardship happened. We don't always get to see that. We don't always get to see that. But know in your heart that there is a purpose. It's hard. We will have hard things. But it will always serve a purpose. So next week we're going to talk about Moses. He's our next friend. And we're going to talk about these 1 million Jews left behind and get to see their exodus from Egypt. Now they've been in here, they've stayed, and they've grown and done well, so much so that they're annoying to the Egyptians, and so they're going to leave. So next week we're going to talk about Moses. Thank you for being here with my big hair. It'll be on St. Paul website here. God willing, it'll be on here to stay. And I hope there was sound. Okay? Bye, guys.